Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about cybersecurity trends and edge computing. The edge sector is growing rapidly, of course, but security has been a major concern. To discuss that, I'm joined by Theresa Lanowitz, Head of Cybersecurity Evangelism at AT&T Business. Theresa, very good to have you with us today.
Great, James. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you.
So let's talk about edge computing and security, but first let's look at the edge market broadly. I mean, first, I just want to check my introduction. I said this that security has been a factor with edge. Am I fair? Is that am I,
You're
am I,
absolutely fair
yeah,
because
yeah.
if you think about what Edge is doing, Edge is really primarily a lot of IoT devices.
Mhm.
And we also have these faster networks, lower latency, higher bandwidth, faster networks. The apps are changing and everything is being collected in that IoT device.
Mhm.
So security is certainly a big part of that. It's the security of how do you secure that endpoint? Because, you've heard about people doing IoT types of programs in their organizations, and they put a camera out there. The password on the camera is 1234, and the adversary knows that. The
Right.
camera's out there, they get into that IoT device, and then they can just move laterally through that network.
I would even, so in terms of edge and security, I would even say that it's been one of the most challenged fields out there when it comes to security. Edge is really like we a lot of companies are enthusiastic about edge, but then they think, we have to deal with the security aspect of this.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we find in our report too, is you have to deal with the security aspect of it. And one of the big pieces of data that we found was that organizations said the more edge use cases they have, so the more edge computing use cases they have, the more they realize that it's really important to bring in these cybersecurity controls. So if they're just thinking about edge, if they're in that ideation phase, they're not as concerned about those cybersecurity controls. They may say, oh, what we've been doing with our legacy stuff may work just perfectly fine. But now once they realize, oh, we're going to put this out here and we're going to have these IoT devices all over the place, they then have to start to think about securing and the
Mhm.
security controls that they're going to put in, how they're going to secure those endpoints. And one of the other really interesting things we found is that endpoints are changing, endpoints are evolving. 48% of our survey participants told us that endpoints today are the traditional types of endpoints. So your phone, your tablet, laptop, desktop. But in the
Mhm.
future, in the next 3 to 5 years, the endpoints are going to be intentional and purpose built. So
Hmm.
think things such as robots, autonomous drones, autonomous vehicles, wearables for healthcare, remote patient monitoring. So those endpoints are changing very, very rapidly and maturing very rapidly. And as a cyber professional, you have to really make sure that you are able to secure those endpoints. You have to make sure that you're making sure that that data that is being collected on those endpoints is protected, it's trusted, but it's also usable by whoever should be using it and whenever they should be using it. So edge computing in reality, it really changes everything. It's that next generation of computing, lower latency, higher bandwidth networks, apps that are ephemeral, headless, come together on an as needed basis. And it's also this idea of serving up things digital first. I'm not
Hmm.
opening an app to find out what I need to do. Things are just happening in that near real time
Well,
capacity.
so, and let's be clear about there's no app needed. How is it embedded in another app? Like, how are people accessing it if they're not accessing it through an app?
Yeah, so it's those applications that are machine to machine communication and control. And if you
Mhm.
think about where we've been over the past 3 years or so, we went through this phase of digital transformation, and digital transformation was absolutely essential as we entered into 2020 and everything that we saw unfold with the pandemic. Then we
Mhm.
go to 2021, 2022, and organizations started to say, we need to operationalize what we're doing. Now we're in this era of edge computing because we do have innovations happening inside of the infrastructure that we're using. So innovations in the networks, for example, innovations in how we can actually code, innovations in how things can be delivered. And so now we're on this path of edge computing. And where this really comes down to business is businesses take a look at edge computing and say, what type of business outcome can I actually create from edge computing? And so one of the things we do in our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report is we say, what are the top use cases for each vertical? We surveyed 7 different verticals.
Mhm.
So for example, in manufacturing, warehousing using robotics, and robots are their top endpoint.
Mhm.
Most vertical markets are saying their top endpoint are still, those common things, laptops, desktops, phones, and so on.
Right.
But digital warehousing was one of the top use cases. The absolute top use case that we saw was from the US SLED, state, local, and higher education market. And it's smart building management. So making sure that you are able to manage the controls of the building, preemptive maintenance, that sort of thing. And that's one of the really smart things that we're seeing with edge computing.
Mhm. Well, all right. So I think maybe the real question is, what advice do you give companies to address these security challenges? I mean, it may depend on the use case, of course, and the device being, protected, but are there some overall best practices in terms of IoT and edge security?
Yeah, and this is really interesting. And these may sound as though it's a lot of common sense, but this is proven empirically in our report this year in 2023, as well as in 2022. So one of the things we know that has happened in IT over the past 4 or 5+ decades is we've had these silos created. We have the application development silo, the networking silo, the operations silo. So with Edge, there's this need for cross-functional communication and collaboration between the development teams, the networking teams, the operations teams, the line of business. The line of business is really crucial in this because the line of business is saying, I need to drive business outcomes for efficiency, for effectiveness by doing X. And they outline some type of use case. And they need to collaborate cross-functionally with all those technical teams that make it happen. And what we also found that 71% of our survey participants said that they're bringing in a trusted third-party advisor to really help with this edge computing. And this is really interesting because 64% said we're bringing in a trusted third-party advisor prior to going to production, and 71% said we're bringing in a trusted third-party advisor once we get to production. And that number varies between the different verticals that we surveyed, but it's a high number across the board. So that's one piece of advice: is communication, collaboration internally as well as externally, bringing in that trusted advisor, whether it is cybersecurity consulting, a managed security services provider once you go to production, bringing in a global systems integrator, a telco, and so on. And the other best practice is really think about what you're doing, begin with the end in mind, and build for cyber resilience, meaning that in the event of some type of breach, in the event of something changing in the infrastructure and so on, you can continue to operate. You're building that resilience in. So if you set up an edge computing use case and you're in a highly regulated environment and all of a sudden new regulations and controls come down, you can go back and you can adapt and build those regulations and controls in without starting from scratch. So really thinking with the end in mind. So those are two kind of really, I think, common sense things. But what we've found in our research is those really, really help organizations as they're building out those edge computing use cases.
So really, it's your first point there. You hire expert help from outside. Don't rely on in-house, professionalism, so to speak. Hire an outside expert.
Yeah, this is all new. As I mentioned, and if you think about edge, you have, like I said, it's software defined, on-prem or in the cloud. Your workloads, your applications, your hosting, it's closer to where that data is being generated and consumed. And then it's that distributed model of management, intelligence, and networks. And when you think about securing what you have in that edge computing use case, it is certainly nonlinear. It's not what we have had in the past. And we've been talking about this in the industry for the past several years, is that it's no longer just the four walls of my organization where I am actually executing computing, gathering data, that sort of thing. So it's about saying, okay, I have someone out there, an expert who has done this before. They have seen this with other organizations. They've seen this with inside my industry with other companies. Bring in that third party, and that third party trusted advisor is really critical to success.
So let's talk about AT&T specifically. I mean, how is AT&T addressing the edge computing needs of its clients? What is AT&T's role here?
Yeah, and so from an AT&T cybersecurity perspective, We offer clients two ways to engage with us, and this is the way we can help them with their edge computing use cases. The first is through our AT&T Cybersecurity Consulting. And so our consultants can come in and help organizations assess their posture, help them assess their risk, do red team exercises, blue team exercises, and so on. So that consulting organization can give you that view of where you are today. And they can also engage with you on an ongoing basis to say, here's what you should do next. Here's kind of a roadmap to follow. And the nice thing about what we do with our AT&T cybersecurity consulting services is they're vendor neutral. They're not coming in and saying, hey, we want to sell you, what we are offering. The second way to engage with AT&T cybersecurity is to help protect your edge computing use cases is through our managed security services. So one of the things we know is that complexity continues to grow. If you think about it, we now have edge computing. And in the past, we have web apps, we have mobile apps, we have internet apps, we have client server apps, we have mainframe things that we still have to take care of. So nothing ever goes away. And the more democratized computing becomes, the more risk there is and the more chance there is for some type of cyber event to occur. So through our managed security services, we can help you with network security. We can help you with endpoint security. We can help you with managed XDR. We can help you with managed SASE. So all of those managed services are available out there as well.
It's interesting you talk about the complexity and that nothing ever goes away, which is true. We keep creating these new technologies. So the old technologies may or may not fade away. They're often there, sort of held together with duct tape. And also your piece about that things get democratized, and I think that's a mega theme throughout technology today is things are getting democratized. Maybe it's access to data, access to artificial intelligence. I never had thought of it necessarily that the democratization would lead to less security, but I see how it would, because more and more people are able to access it. So it would confuse the environment.
Yeah, and that democratization is something really interesting. If you look historically, let's think back, in the 1960s when you had data centers evolving, the biggest security risk that you had was that somebody would come into that data center, spill coffee on the keyboard, accidentally kick a plug out from under the wall. The moment we came out of that data center and democratized computing with personal computers and PC LAN types of networks, we then just rolled out the red carpet for the adversary. And you think about sort of the PC LAN type of adversary, it was largely hobbyists, somebody who was bored, usually students in that era in like the 1980s or so, who would want to go in and say, all right, just leave a digital signature, right? Say, I'm smarter than you, I broke into your network. But then we kind of fast forward and we have adversaries of all types. We have the lone wolf adversary, who is somebody that you really have to watch for things such as insider threats. Then you have sort of those affiliate networks. You have the cyber gangs that are out there. You have the groups that are doing this just for financial gain. So you have a whole host of different types of cyber adversaries that are out there, and the types of attacks that they execute are also very different as well. And what we found in our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report, and this is really an interesting piece of data, because when people hear me say this, or when they read the report, they sit back and they say, are you really sure about this? And the answer is yes, I'm really sure about this. So we asked 1,418 professionals from around the world, director level and higher in title, and they were cybersecurity professionals, IT professionals, network, line of business and operations professionals. We said, from your perspective, what is the biggest attack that you're concerned about with this new era of computing, edge computing? And it came back and we said, on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you rank these sort of attack concerns? DDoS attacks were their number one concern. And last year we asked the same question, and we have 8 different attack types that people identified. And last year DDoS was number 8 out of 8, and ransomware was number 1 out of 8. In 2023, ransomware is number 8 out of 8, and DDoS is number 1 out of 8. And if you look at how edge computing is being rolled out, largely through a series of IoT types of devices, if a DDoS attack can be executed against an IoT device, and you take those IoT devices offline for 25, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, that's a tremendous impact to the business, whatever they are using those devices for. And if the adversary has been able to gain access to the network and move laterally, then they can sort of install some type of malware, and then you have ransomware attacks. Business email compromise was also something that organizations identified as a top concern. They also identified insider threat, personal information exfiltration, nation state attacks, certainly. But DDoS, good old fashioned DDoS, is making a comeback. And we're seeing that in the news on a daily basis, that DDoS is definitely making a comeback.
So the dedicated denial of service, it is promoted, you said, or enabled by all these weak endpoint devices. That's exactly the point of that?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that they're weak endpoint devices, but the endpoint devices may not necessarily be secure. And the adversary can figure that out pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think the big question ultimately is the future of edge computing and security over the next, say 1 to 3 years, maybe a little further out. I mean, obviously, edge is going to continue to grow. It doesn't get quite as many headlines these days in the world of artificial intelligence. Seems like it kind of sucks up all the air these days, but edge is growing really rapidly. And security is a major concern. What do you see looking ahead for that?
Yeah, so looking ahead, one of the things that I was really, I think, very, very happy to see in the data that we collected this year was that there's this almost distributed or balanced investment across security, applications, planning, and the network. Because we ask people, of your total edge budget, how much are you spending on security? How much are you spending on applications? How much are you spending on planning? And how much on the network? And across the board, the average was for security, they're spending 22% of their budget on security, 22% on networks, 23% on planning, 30%, 30% on network, 23% on planning. Mm-hmm. And if you look at security, applications, and planning, those are traditionally the types of things that organizations do on a very ad hoc basis. But with this idea of silos beginning to erode, the idea that we need to work cross-functionally and communicate cross-functionally, the reality that security is not just a technical problem, but it is really a business requirement, organizations are now starting to plan because they see these edge computing use cases. And in many cases, they're safety critical, they're mission critical. So they're saying, we have to get this right. We can't just roll this out there and say, oh, if we get it wrong, we'll just release another version the next day. There are way too many parts and it's way too complex. So they're saying 22% of our budget on security. Security now has a seat at the table. 22% of our budget on applications. Really awesome, because we're just not going to create software, throw it over the wall and say, if it's broken, we'll fix it. Secure applications are going to change. We're going to see a lot more non-GUI or headless types of applications that will come together on an as-needed basis and communicate information data back and forth. And then 23% on planning. I was very, very impressed by that. And then 30% of network. So it's a pretty even investment across the board. So given that even investment, I think we're going to see a lot of really interesting use cases out there. The endpoints that people identify that they're using, robots in a healthcare situation, for example. Think about how robots could be used for efficiency inside of a hospital, for example. Robots could deliver supplies to a nurse's station without any sort of interruption. They're not going to drop things. They're not going to lose things along the way. A robot can disinfect a patient room after an exam or after a patient leaves the hospital far more efficiently and far more effectively than a human can. So robots in healthcare, wearables in healthcare, remote patient monitoring, understanding vitals being sent right back to the doctor so the doctor can monitor immediately. If you think about US SLED, state, local, higher education, this idea of smart building, using edge computing for public transit use cases. If you think about retail, smart warehousing, intelligent warehousing, understanding what's going on in the warehouse, and that spills over to manufacturing as well. Manufacturing using sensors and cameras for video-based quality inspection to say that if I have a defect that's inserted on the assembly line, then I can immediately, as a manufacturer, remediate that defect, causing me less concern, less recall, thereby expending less dollars further on down the line. So these use cases that are out there are just absolutely phenomenal, incredible, and they're only going to get better. And the nice thing is, we see them in our everyday lives. We use them in our everyday lives, and we don't even realize it because The technology is frictionless, and that's really where you want to be, is with that frictionless technology, that things just work. And I've been in this industry for a long time, and one of the things that I have talked about formerly in my career is that technology just needs to operate just as a utility does. You know, when we turn on the light switch, we don't think too much about it. When we turn on water, we don't think too much about it. And we're getting closer to that with all of these edge computing use cases that we now see in our daily lives.
Interesting. I mean, I like the idea of technology as a utility. I think that we sometimes struggle with it, but hopefully it will get easier. At any rate, Theresa, wow, that was fascinating. I learned a ton. It was great. Totally appreciate you sharing your expertise today, and I hope you come back and talk with us again sometime.
Well, thank you, James, so much. I would be thrilled to come back and talk with you. This was really, really great discussion today. Thank you.